today and tomorrow, and it's not by the way, it's not obligatory, but there's this kind of follow-on session tomorrow where we'll continue some of the discussion today, and you can see what you feel. But we'll be we'll also be quite self-contained today, and yeah. So I'm going to kind of start out on the session, and we're going to have various pauses. I'm going to not. Other than you probably have already read the description, but essentially the intention of this session, and you could call it also being, if I was a nod to Heidegger, we could have called it being in politics for people, but was that we're going to discuss a bit, I think there's a general, I don't think that maybe we would say certainly politically or on collective problems that we face today, things are going as well as they could do. So, I'm going to start with, I would call it, Houston, we have a problem. There's certain kind of stuckness, there's certain things that aren't working. And it's going to be our suggestion, which we're going to explore, that this somehow relates. There's a kind of quite a deep source of that we could uncover together. There's a reason that we haven't sort of got out of that stuckness. So just to illustrate, I mean, I know this is sort of almost cliche now, so I kind of want to move over it quite quickly, but, the climate crisis is kind of accelerating. The worst wildfires, I think, in years are raging right now in California and Oregon, in the western states, United States. And this isn't just, this hasn't just been the US. This has happened in starting with Australia last autumn, through to now. And this is the result of human-caused climate change. We've created a world that's ready to burn. And this is a picture from just last week in California. And this is actually, the picture at the bottom right is actually from Brazil. So it's happened all over the world. And I kind of want to point out just that the climate crisis represents a political failure or a political stuckness that's very obvious, which is that we need to act collectively like almost we never have before, if we are to address this situation. And we are not doing that very effectively at the present. Another example, I think, again, very much obviously present, but I want to emphasize the political dimension of it, which is, the COVID situation doesn't simply, we've had, these things like this have happened before, but what you could see this year in certain countries, I think one example would clearly be the US, in which this, you have epidemics, they happen. The question is, that is kind of, as it were, a nature of how disease happens. And the response, like in the US, famously at the very beginning of the crisis was, the COVID situation was poorly managed. I think there's a general agreement now. They could have taken action earlier. In other countries, in fact, my wife is Taiwanese, and we were in Taiwan in February, and Taiwan dealt with this crisis, and if you put up the graph for Taiwan, really differently. And I would suggest that while, the existence of epidemics like this are, they happen, how we respond to them societally and how effective we do is obviously a good related to our political capacities and our ability to take effective collective action. And I think in general, one could say that, for example, in the US and even in other countries, I'm actually British, although I live in France. And, my mother keeps ringing me up, at least about England, saying, no one's obeying the rules about, keeping a reasonable distance from each other. And, there's crazy numbers of people on the beach and so on. So there's something, and not just when I say by the word political, I don't just mean our political leaders. I mean our ability as human beings to work together, to collaborate together. So we kind of, there's definitely challenges. And I want to start then with a story. So a woman walked into a hospital, and in fact, this woman walked into a hospital in 1985 in California. And she walked into, in fact, an obesity program, which was being run by a gentleman called Vincent Felitti, who's now at the time, he'd already been practicing medicine for some time at that point, so he's now quite old. And he was running an obesity clinic, which was non-surgical weight loss. And this woman that you can see here on the left walked in and she weighed 408 pounds. So she was morbidly obese. And she walked in, and the thing that she said was like, my main problem I have in life is that I'm so overweight. It's, you know, da da da. And the treatment that Felitti had, which was this non-surgical treatment, but was extremely effective. You know, basically a year later, she walks out looking like, on the right, she's gone from 408 pounds to 132 pounds. You know, great success, right? This was amazing, very effective program. And
just one second. I think I'm just pausing because I know maybe we look at screen differently. So when we look here, it says we're looking at you. I'm going to close that so we just don't distract it. Yeah. Sylvie was trying a different method by which we could see everybody, because we can't see everybody. We love seeing everybody. But if you see me looking off screen, it's because I was looking at all your faces. But now I can see just the face I have. But okay, so I just want to check. So, okay, but something went wrong. So a few months later, you know, in a follow-up, he meets this woman again, and it's not going well. He actually thought she'd gained more weight than he thought was biologically possible. I mean, something like she gained about 80 pounds. I mean, to just imagine pounds and kilograms, I'm trying to think what's the conversion, but it's about, I'm trying to think of it. It's like 40, something like, yeah, it's like a very large number of kilograms, 20, 30, I don't know, more kilograms in a space of about 2 months, I think. You know, he literally thought this was almost, how could she gain that much weight? You know, like eat enough food to do that. And what had happened, and it turned out that basically she'd actually stayed at the weight that she had reached for several weeks. It wasn't like immediate. For several weeks after the program, it was going fine. And then one day, basically at work, like kind of in the lunchroom, a co-worker had started to flirt with her. And kind of propositioned her. I mean, I don't know if she suggested sex, or, I mean, this is the write-up from Van der Kolk, but basically propositioned her. And she went home pretty much immediately that night. She went home and she started eating. And she kind of ate every moment. She stuffed herself during the day, and she literally ate while sleepwalking at night. And the question was, why? I mean, this was, you know, what had happened? And when they kind of kept asking, what happened was, when Felitti asked her and, you know, talked with her, she revealed that, you know, after some discussion, basically that she had a lengthy incest history with her grandfather. And in fact, when asked, she had actually begun obesity. Her obesity had begun around the age of 11 or 12, basically coincident with being molested by her and by her grandfather. And now, this was the only second case that Felitti, who had practiced medicine at this point for 23 years, had ever encountered. Yet 10 days later, he encountered a similar story. And what they discovered at Kaiser Permanente in this program was that a large number, in fact, most of their morbidly obese patients had been sexually abused as children. And they also uncovered a host of other family problems: alcoholism, you know, divorce, physical abuse. And the thing about this is it's kind of mistaking the symptom for the disease. 12 years later, this woman dropped out of the program, and he basically didn't see her again. He didn't really encounter her again, but he met her somehow 12 years later. And she'd subsequently actually had bariatric surgery as another way to deal with her obesity, for which she'd lost 96 pounds, but she'd become suicidal. It had taken 5 psychiatric hospitalizations and 3 courses of electroshock
to control her suicidality. And basically, Felitti, and I'm going to say, points out that obesity, which is considered a major public health problem, may in fact be a personal solution for many. And consider the implications. And I think, in fact, I'm just going to give us, and it's due to Felitti, there's a really amazing video you can watch of him explaining some of this. He said, imagine that you're in a house and you start seeing smoke. And you're like, oh my God, it's really smoky in here. And you go and get a load of fans and you turn on the fans to blow the smoke away. But in fact, what is smoke normally a symptom of? Well, a fire. And obviously, if you turn on fans, what are you doing? You're actually making the fire worse. So if you mistake the symptoms of something for the disease, you can actually make the disease worse. Just as if you thought, oh, the problem's smoke. It's getting so smoky in here. You know, let's deal with that. And that basically, if you mistake someone's solution for a problem to be eliminated, not only are they likely to fail treatment, but you actually may cause other problems to kind of come about. And so basically, to put it simply here, the problem this woman was dealing with was this trauma, this huge unresolved trauma of being, you know, sexually abused by her grandfather. And what she had successfully, in a way, done was she'd found a solution. If I'm massively overweight, not only is it comforting, but I certainly don't have any sexual, you know, I'm safe from any sexual encounters. I'm protecting myself very effectively. And as he said, this is a later quote, one female rape victim told Felitti, overweight is overlooked and that's the way I need to be. And just to be clear, this work by Felitti led to an incredible study called the A study. And it was about adverse child events that was actually run with the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the United States, over many years and involved thousands, I think over 20,000 people, and basically documented, and they've done, it's now been followed, it finished in, I think, about 95, 97, but they followed the participants for decades, and they have systematic evidence that large numbers of this, of kind of, whether it's alcoholism, drug abuse, even like depression, many of the issues that you encounter in our society, many of those people have a large number of what they call adverse childhood events, be that sexual or physical abuse, divorce, you know, drug early, you know, other things. And by the way, all of this is credited. These quotes are actually slightly edited quotes from an amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score by someone called Bessel van der Kolk, who's was a Harvard psychiatrist, kind of Harvard psychologist, and who studied trauma, starting with PTSD since the 1970s. And the book's an extraordinary book. I highly recommend it. Now, the point of this story is that blind spots. So this woman, you could say, had a blind spot. She came in, she didn't come to Felitti's clinic and say, hey, I had this childhood trauma and this is leading to my eating problems. She said, I've got obesity, can you please treat my obesity? And what we don't know, and we don't know, which is particularly problematic for us, because it's not only it affects us, but we don't see it, and we don't see that we don't see it. It's not like something we're explicitly ignoring. We're like, oh, I know that I was abused, or I know that this thing happened to me, but but it's not relevant. It's like it's not even present to the view. I mean, and by the way, I'm not saying that sometimes people aren't aware of those things, but it's maybe they're not aware that it's not like it's kind of, it's not like recovered trauma. It's not like someone, oh, we didn't even aware of it, but we're not aware of how it's impacting us, how it impacts how we see the world. And there is, however, obviously one of the things that's tricky about blind spots, by their definition, is they're hard to see. I don't know what people say in other languages, but classically a blind spot, when I first heard the word, for me was about driving a car. When I don't know who here, you could just put up your hand, I can see most of you, but who here has learned to drive a car at some point in their life. Great. You know, most people, not everyone nowadays has, but basically I got taught, you know, there's certain places you can't see in a car, and the danger is that you are not aware you can't see them. You know, the classic one is changing lanes on the motorway, and there can be a car hidden where you can't see it, but you've checked your mirrors, so you think you've seen everything, and then you change lanes and you hit the car. And that's you know, that's the classic blind spot, you know, things we can't see and we're not aware we can't see. But there is an impact. I think one of the clues for discovering where we as human beings have blind spots is there's kind of a stuckness. So in this case, the woman couldn't really lose weight. She couldn't create, and you can't break out of some, well, I don't want to even say this is destructive, but some pattern of undesired. Destructive is maybe a bit strong, but in this case, it would be. This woman would almost certainly die if this didn't get resolved. Just physically, she would probably suffer all kinds of debilitating physical things and end up probably dying, you know, early morbidity. So there's kind of stuckness. There's an inability, I'd say, to create a new future, and there's a lack of possibility. So those are the kind of symptoms that we might notice when we have a sort of stuckness. So this is a moment, Hannah, I'm just going to warn you in advance. Could you get ready to, does she know how to set up breakout rooms? And if not, do you want to go help her? Because just to check, you know, how to set up, because we're going to set up breakout rooms of 3, I think, or 4 people, 3 people, I think. Mm-hmm. And we're going to go to that in a moment. Yeah? Right now.
Yeah, but I think you want to set it up with like, oh, what are we talking about? Stuckness individually or collectively?
Yeah, so I'm going to start here. I want people, so what I would like people to do in just 2 seconds is that, and I want to emphasize the last point, sorry, about blind spots before we come to that, which is that blind spots are not just trauma. Traumas are an extreme version of that in life. But, you know, we have, as I said, the blind spot in the car. We have other kinds of just blind spots by the way that we think about things. One very good, I mean, it's maybe when I say blind spots, it may be a bit subtle, but I don't know, has anyone ever seen a visual illusion with an arrow at one end pointing either inwards or outwards? And if you see that, most people think that an arrow with the arrows pointing outwards is longer than with the arrows pointing inwards. Has anyone ever seen that visual illusion? I think many people are nodding. It turns out that visual illusion doesn't happen everywhere in the world. In particular, if you go to, and it's now relatively rare cultures, but you go to cultures which do not have large numbers of modern buildings, but for example, have round buildings. For example, they live in huts, mud huts that don't have, and they live in a world which doesn't have lots of sharp edges and corners. That visual illusion doesn't happen that much. It's not an inherent part of human cognition, but turns out to sort of be enculturated. And, you know, there are other ways, like a lot of people when we grow up might have a particular view of men or women. We have a certain way that we'll just see a woman versus a man, or someone who's gay versus someone who's not gay, or things like that. So there are also whole kinds of the way the world occurs for us, you could say, in a general sense. So what I want us to do now, and wow, I've got such an amazing group. People have already shared the illusion image, which is people are super efficient. What I want us to do in groups of 3, and I'm going to say we'll have about 10 minutes, is I want you to try looking maybe where you're stuck. So before we get to why you're stuck, and I'd like to look for yourself in life, like really authentically, and be like where you're stuck. And I'll just give a very simple example for myself. So my mother is 77, and she is a farmer as well as other things. And my mother, and the conversation with my mother traditionally go like this. So I ring up my mother picks up the phone, I say, "Hi Ma, how are you?" And my mother, the first thing my mother will say is, "Oh, Rufus, you don't know how tired I am. You know, the pigs got out last night, this is not working, that's not working." And, and then the conversation will go on for about 2 minutes. And then at some point I'll sort of interrupt my mother and start giving her advice about how she could be less tired. Like she could do less, she could get more help, certain things. And for some reason, even though we've had this kind of conversation quite similarly for about 20 years, she never appreciates my advice. In fact, it kind of annoys her, and then we have a sort of argument about that, and then the kind of conversation ends. And that's how often conversations go with my mother. And this is kind of an area where I'm sort of stuck. You know, I kind of have these conversations with my mother, and that's how they sort of go. And it's not like a terrible stuckness, but it's the kind of annoying stuckness that this is just goes on happening, that whenever I ring up my mother, we have these kind of like Groundhog Day-like conversations that don't really fulfill either of us. And I'm like, why? Why does this happen? And by the way, just a hint, obviously other people's blind spots are often glaringly obvious to you. If any of you have been in relationships in your life, you're often aware that your partner has some obviously glaring blind spots that if only they would see, things would be a lot better. But it's for you. So here's the exercise. Like, it could be anything from my mother to something much bigger, but where are you stuck in life?
I think maybe it's not very obvious where we're stuck, because we rarely think of like, hey, I'm stuck. So it could be like something you stopped. Maybe you used to play the piano or an instrument, you stop. Or an area where there's not very much excitement. It's like you're not really looking forward to it. It's like you're kind of dragging a bit your feet towards it.
You know, a classic one would be sometimes it said, your mother-in-law, I don't know, certain people you're stuck with.
Whatever.
Yeah.
You can look, we're very bossy. So you go into breakout room, and then you can use this breakout room. Some people it's kind of really obvious and wonderful share. If it's not obvious, like try to speculate, like just speculate. And so Hannah, we can send people into breakout rooms at 3, and we'll take about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I
think we'll take about 10 minutes.
We'll give you 2 minutes. We'll give you a 2 minutes warning before it ends.
So 3 minutes each. So let's say 9 minutes. And Bjorn, if you stick with us, I promise this will be very revealed just to your answer. There's going to be a very soon a connection between this and our stuckness. So if you trust me, as a collective, we'll get to that very quickly.
Okay.
Is there any other questions before we do that? No, great. Let's go to the work.
So at the beginning, we started kind of pointing out, you know, where as a society we've been stuck. It seems that we're stuck with climate change. There are things that we're incapable of really addressing. And then why is it that we're stuck? And often there's a contingency to be like, oh, if we had better technology. And a society is composed of people. And how do people function? And how do we as human beings function? And what we're trying to point to is that, as we can see in this example of this woman who struggle to really have a breakthrough in how she relates to herself. And that has to do with something of her blind spot, something she can't see has her stuck in her way of being. And so similarly, what we're trying to explore is like, as human beings, we have our individuality causes sometimes to be stuck in areas of our life, and dare to kind of explore where is it that we're stuck collectively, and to play in that beautiful dance. So I hope people had a wonderful breakout room and start to explore where is it that we're stuck individually. Rufus, would you like to?
Should I share it?
Yes, we'll share screen again and come back to where we were.
One more. I guess. Yeah. Here it is.
Here we go.
So for Bjorn particularly, and I think other people, so this is what it leads into is, sorry, click on here. So the collective and politics, and in particular, so we said, where are we stuck collectively as societies? And as we said, stuckness is maybe a sign of something in the background. So just, you know, to reiterate, the climate crisis, Sylvie just said, would be an example of quite serious stuckness that we, you know, now for decades have been discussing that we should take dramatic action, serious action. I could give another example. I don't know if people saw, but a few days ago, the biodiversity report for around the Aichi goals for 2020 was released. And basically, of the 20 core goals, not a single one was achieved. I think there was reasonable progress on 7 out of 20. There was progress, partial progress. So, there's a kind of sense in which we're not making, we struggle in that regard. And, that's not totally modern. That's gone on for humans. So I want to give a specific example, though. I want to go from that very generality to something quite specific. And I don't know, just to check, maybe people can raise their hand or just wave. I can't see everyone. But I don't want to go into too much detail, but who is familiar or heard of the Gilets jaunes protest in France? So this was a kind of series of protests, and the Gilets jaunes literally means yellow jackets. So these yellow jackets you can see, these kind of fluorescent jackets are a Gilets jaunes. And in 2018, 2019, there were these protests, and it was one of the largest protests in France in a generation. It's like, wow, at some point people were like, this is, what's going to happen? This is Macron, the proud Macron will be brought to the table. So I just want to check, have people heard of these a little bit or not? Some people have, some people haven't. Okay.
Yes.
Many people have. So I'm not going to talk in too much detail about it. And this is actually in the Place de la République in Paris. It was started out as a protest over basically an increase in a fuel tax. Initially was the kind of, and that's why people wearing their yellow vests and blocking traffic basically. And it escalated. I would say it was neither left nor right. It wasn't really clear. There was no explicit political demands other really than removing this fuel tax at the beginning. There were a variety of some degree of political demands, but it wasn't like there was a program, that there was a systematic set of demands. There wasn't really any leadership, and I'll come to that. And there were really very few results from, I would say, from this, other than a reverse of the fuel tax, petrol tax. You could get debate about that. Now, I think that this, I kind of say this as a sort of stuckness, that often there's political protest, there's stuff, and then there is, I'm not saying there's never any change, but there's not really the results. It doesn't result in a new political agenda or something that's really powerful for us. And I want to make a suggestion about that, about what are our blind spots there. And I'm going to just mention, I brought up this example because I think there's a very interesting one. So what view is implicit with the Gilets jaunes? So in fact, I'm going to skip just because of time today a little bit discussing groups. But I do just want to ask, actually, before I ask, I want to do it as a collective here. Does anyone have any, what kind of, just like a view in the background for that woman might be like, if I'm thin, there's going to be sex or intimacy that I don't want. That was in the background, almost not like a conscious thought, but something like, or being obese protects me. That was like an implicit kind of view, or a kind of probably way of thinking that's not even unconscious, that they're in her head. So what kind of view do you think is implicit or just automatic that might be in our society in general, but which is showing up in the Gilets jaunes protest, and which might be kind of explaining some of the stuckness? So please just either go off mute, or I don't know if you know how to raise your hand, but we could probably be a bit disorderly here because there's so few of us. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. So does anyone have any suggestions for what view is there in the background with the Gilets jaunes, for example?
I mean, this is Irene. You mean, what did they mean to do? What's their view, or what is the...
What explains some of the stuckness? How do they see the world? Like on the back of that guy's jacket is "fuck le système."
Yeah, well, this is...
Let me give an example. If I were to start trying to sell t-shirts which said, "The state is great. Politicians are awesome. Government, we want more government." Would you think I would sell to a lot of t-shirts like that?
To the Gilets jaunes.
To the Gilets jaunes, or even generally. Do people generally think, wow, the state is amazing. violence, child mortality is at one of the lowest levels ever in history. Oh my God, the state is amazing. Do people think like that?
Well, I think just to come back to the example,
yes,
I think we feel generally exhausted, and a lot of people have the feeling that they can't do anything,
right,
not change the system, and that the system in big letters is sort of so powerful that even if I try to the best of my capabilities, like nonprofit organizations and left-wing, yada yada, a little bit of us are trying this and that, the overall road is sort of paved to collective Armageddon. I mean, there is no alternative.
Brilliant, just brilliant. So one example, and I think this would be very, and by the way, this would even be dramatic if, and I have gone and kind of interviewed, let's say, people coming out of university. I'm now no longer that. I'd like to think I'm that age, but I'm no longer. But, I go and let's say, we can't change the system. It's not like on his jacket was not written transformer le système or la système. It wasn't like transform the system. It was fuck the system. It was like there's no hope. Now imagine and it's just like being a beast. If you live in a world where there is no possibility of change, that's what you think. I mean, it's not literally true, right? I mean, it's not a fact. Like, it's not like a law of gravity, but you live in that. And you live in particularly, there's no possibility of political change. Like in the sense of through politics, through government, through the state, through organized collective action, you're going to have a certain kind of world in which that one of the most dangerous things about blind spots, by the way, is they're self-fulfilling. Like what generally the most, like blind spots which get immediately come up against reality kind of disappear quite quickly. But it's what you can't, often the best things that they keep things hidden from your view. I'm a racist and I think things about, I don't know, people of a different skin color, and I will find evidence that backs up my view. I will find it. If I don't participate in politics, if I think that there's no point, that there's no way we could change the system, well, I won't participate. I won't actively participate, and then we won't see any change, and I'll be right. Go ahead. Sorry, Alistair. Yeah.
Maybe just for the sake of the group, so that maybe some people have an aha moment, share or agree. I basically see two major blind spots in activism. One I call the esoterics. They think that only individual meditation and trauma healing, drinking ayahuasca and doing MDMA sessions with a partner, stuff like that, will heal us all collectively. I think there are a ton of major blind spots in that, but let's say that's a group that I know since quarter of a century. And the other ones, I always call them, let's say, the exoterics. So these are usual social entrepreneurs, impact investors, and I don't know, professors in like major institutions. They really think that technological change, moving to, I don't know, renewable energies and renewing the grid system and blockchain and stuff like that will really do it all. Whereas I think it's an and. It's not either or, it's an and.
Exactly. Now I want to be able to come to my colleagues Lee and President. I want to also let you guys share in a moment. I'm just going to finish the point. I mean, I hope that many others of you will have things to say. I know that. But just to come back to this question, I want to have, so they're apolitical. So it reinforces what you just said. And this is a quote from James Macaulay. There's an article in the New York Review of Books. They have no official platform, no leadership hierarchy, and no reliable communications. Everyone can speak for the movement, and yet no one can. When a small faction, and this is very interesting, when a small faction, this is in early 2019, a small faction within the Gilets Jaunes fielded a list of candidates for the upcoming European elections. So they were going to participate in kind of politics. Their sharpest opposition came from within. To many Gilets jaunes, the 10 people who had put their names forward, among them a nurse, a truck driver, and an accountant, were traitors to the cause, having dared to replicate the elite that the rest of the movement disdains. Now, I think one blind spot is we can't change things. I think we just discussed two others. I would say that there's a very fascinating one. And I think this blind spot is so interesting because it's blind spots which are just obviously mistaken are kind of easy, right? Like, to us, it's kind of obvious that if you've got a blind spot and you're a racist, like your blind spot is like, hey, it's just obvious that people with more melanin in their skin or less melanin in their skin are like this. That's just obviously wrong, right? But I would say that it's quite common amongst progressive thinkers. You know, there's a tendency amongst Untitled, probably people coming that we're kind of liberal, progressive types, maybe, I don't know. Is that, you know, equality is good, hierarchy is bad, things should be very flat, we should have flat organizations, we should have flat politics. But I would say in the Gilets jaunes is implicitly a quite powerful view that basically all hierarchy is inherently oppressive, pretty much. And therefore almost all leadership, other than leadership by temporary acclamation, we're in a group, and someone gets temporary acclaimed and they can do something. But no one, and just read those sentences again, we had that. No one, the 10 who put their names forward were traitors called having dared to replicate the elite, i.e. leadership. The fact, by definition, anyone who became leaders or representatives of this group would be an elite which are disdained. And that leadership is inherently oppressive. So what kind of politics will you have in a world where hierarchy is oppressive and where leadership is basically oppressive, almost by its nature? You're going to have a certain kind of world. You're going to have a certain kind of leadership. You know, anyone who becomes a leader is just on an ego trip to take advantage of others or feather their own nest or whatever. And who would then become leaders? Who will choose to become leaders in a system that thinks like that about leaders? Well, people who are kind of like that. And then we'll be right. Look at them. They're corrupt. They're incompetent. They're dishonest. They're inauthentic. They're having affairs when they said they weren't going to do that. You know. And we're right. So satisfying. So I want to take this as a lead-in to a deeper examination of this, I think, this question, which we could call the equality complex. And I think at this moment, Liam, I think you're going to want to take over in a moment here and introduce us to the equality complex so we can stop sharing our screen.
Okay, so, I'll start this presentation immediately with that title with a, spoiler alert that, the presentation isn't about that equality is wrong by any means. On the contrary, the idea of equality needs an homage. I mean, it's done an incredible amount for us. And to sort of build with what Rufus was talking about earlier, many things that we get stuck in or a source of stuckness are a response to a traumatic situation. Most of our ancestors would have been at some time stuck in a highly traumatic situation of serfdom or slavery or oppression of various kinds, and the idea of equality has gotten us where we are in many ways, is serving as a political rallying cry. And so by no means am I going to question overall the use of the idea of equality or say that it's wrong. But I'll start with just a short story, right? The first time I ever visited a Plum Village monastery, so actually it was the sister monastery in San Diego called Deer Park. It was the first time I heard this, but in every monastery in the system, they do this. before a meal, we renew our aspiration to be free of the inferiority complex, the superiority complex, and the equality complex. And the first time I heard that, I said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. You know, they're talking about something that I know about. And I took a sort of trip down memory lane, and particularly the first sentence coming from my mother, who is a school teacher, who would complain bitterly at the dinner table that she had to teach the children that they could all do anything they want. And then, you know, she would have these students who would be not particularly good basketball players, who thought they were going to be professionals in middle school, and they didn't need to study anything. But sort of as a matter of course, that she had to say, well, anybody can do anything we want. Or times in university when things got very contentious. For example, a professor insinuated that the warrior culture of Japan, feudal Japan, put different emphasis on the value of males and females because basically they were fighting all the time for land, right? It was a samurai culture. And so men being more, capable or better at wielding swords on average got a higher value. And then there was a huge amount of consternation, which the existence of size and strength differences between males and females generally were disputed, and the class erupted into argument. Of course, anybody who knows testosterone it's just what steroids are, synthetic testosterone. Taking extra amount of that typically male hormone is considered a performance enhancing drug in athletics. That's what they do, is they just measure the amount of testosterone in your system, and if you have too much of it, then you're disqualified from competition. So there's some difference there. And then, of course, much of the ideology of communism, which I can't go into because of time constraints, but I worked for a while as an economic researcher in Tanzania, which was the only African socialist country, sort of working with people who'd been there under Julius Nyerere and who could tell me all about what happened, the perversities of that developed in that system, which are very much in parallel to what happened in Eastern Europe. But going back to Plum Village, we understand the inferiority complex, the superiority complex, and I think, but what about equality? Okay. And so the difference is basically, you can see my picture now, yeah? Okay. It's really, I'm greater than you, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, or I'm worried that I'm less than you. But if I'm worried about being equal, right? We're still measuring, right? I'm doing that on purpose. Yeah, I can resume sharing at any point. And what that builds is an experience of ourselves as separate from each other, right? And so experiencing ourselves not as a we, but as two separate people, right? So at that point, which was sort of a dualism, and I think the point that I want to get at by saying questioning equality is a bit like, we've decided that it's real, right? Okay, I should skip forward to this, right? To get that sort of made a little bit more concrete, we could say, X is good, but obsession with X is not so good. So if you put anything in those blanks, then most people agree with good looking. Being good looking is good, but being obsessed with good looking is not so good. Being intelligent is good, but being obsessed with intelligence is not so good. However, my experience is that if you put equality in that blank, then people can get quite reactive, right? Which is really, this is sort of a paraphrase of what would end up being a paraphrase then if you put equality in that blank of a famous quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. Equality is not a source of suffering, but the equality complex is, right? Because we're separate from one another, which a lot of people wouldn't understand about that. Okay, and so at that point, I think we'd take a break for just a few questions if people have them. And do people understand essentially the point there? And unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment at this point.
Did you see in the chat? We can take more time. Andrea, yeah, please go for it.
Well, the overall things that we're doing is very beautiful. First, I think that when we touch subject like equality, I mean, in this PowerPoint, we start from a moral stance and we arrive also to a psychological stance when we speak about obsession. But all this, let's say, unfolding of these problematics come from the Enlightenment period, and we are not yet out from the Enlightenment period. In the Enlightenment period, they start to say, your rights are my rights, my freedom is your freedom. But who draw the lines? Then someone else come and ask, who draw the lines that my rights are your rights or my freedom is your freedom? And when we speak about these things, then a system comes, a group of people come and start to think hierarchically to give an order to system, because we submissively have in our human nature that sometimes we are exhausted, as Alistair said, and we need guidance. We need someone that takes over our responsibility to make the job. So the thing is that unless we don't change ourselves first, then we are like a cat that is after his tail continually. Mm. I don't know if I was clear in saying this, you know. Equality is a good stance, intellectually speaking, but in the concrete, tangibly, what is it?
Right.
What is, we make all these long-winded, beautiful ideas, and we talk about them, but into practice, I mean, the game now is to put into practice these things, and it's very difficult. I don't know if, as species, we are evolved at that point to do this step that is necessary to do it, to transform society. Because otherwise we create system over system, and it's since centuries that we create system based on structural hierarchies, because it seems that this is the only thing that we can do. It's like that comes out naturally, you know. Like the lions is the head of the herd, and there are all the girls of the lions going hunting, no? So it's a structural system that, but is by nature, of course. We have the gift of the intellect, and of course to understand emotion. And I think, if I'm allowed, Rufus, what you have started with the lady is because we don't recognize so often our emotions, so we fail to put into practice what we really need, not just what we really want, and what the others' needs are, you know. So, yeah. But I'm curious to see where the quality goes now, because it's something that is crucial today.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything you're saying. I mean, that's kind of, you know, I would say that that's basically, when you say that something is the truth, right, that basically what's happened is we decide equality is the truth, and you can say it's the intellectualization of moral life. It's the way, like what the West has used to kind of make morality intellectual, like it does everything else, right? Which is just more alienation of life itself. It's like, because people don't love each other, we need to invest in a system of morality that can safeguard us, and we'll build it on equality. But in order to enforce it, then we need a system. So we're back in, mechanics again, and how do you, and we see it. What strikes people is a mechanical political dialogue. Of course, it's all around us. No surprise, right? Any other comments?
I'm happy to jump on and then invite the female voices. For me, the question here overall into the group, because I think we're all pretty advanced, is like, how meta do we go? So I think it's a very necessary discussion to go beyond equality, though seeing 98% of the wealth of humanity distributed to very few people, or to a very large extent still seeing female rights suppressed on the vast majority of all countries. I'm totally a fan of like natural hierarchies and the whole, hierarchical, let's say, meta systematic approach, like from integral. And at the same time, I think what we need to build into society is, it's nice to think beyond equality once equality is installed, right? I'm lower middle class, avant-garde social entrepreneur living Berlin Mitte, then it becomes funky. But to the vast majority of very underprivileged, like let's say a bottom of the pyramid, it only becomes sort of a mental abstraction, right? When you live like bottom of the pyramid, let's say in India or wherever. Anyhow, I just wanted to make that point because we need to abstract the level of abstraction that we bring onto a discussion to be able to discern on what level of discourse we're actually operating. And with that, I leave this whole thing and happy to
just to briefly respond to that, Alistair, another way of looking at that question, I get it sometimes, is that the West has vigorously espoused, to put it mildly, its belief in equality and utterly failed to do this for a very long time. So at the bottom of your thing is that, well, we can afford to let go of equality after we achieve it. What evidence is there that this will ever achieve it, would be my response, right? So I would look at history and say there is zero chance of it ever being reached by this goal. So saying that it's premature because we have to wait until it is achieved, in a system that has utterly failed to ever really achieve it, right? By basically pursuing the same line of logic that has been pursued, right, is a difficult proposition, right? And so that's the question, is like, is it a luxury to let go of it, or is it an admission that basically what we've been doing so thus far has not been super effective, right? Like, we have not stood for third world equality, really, right? It's the third world, right? When the climate change starts to hit, I mean, and Bangladesh goes underwater, I mean, who really believes the West is morally prepared or has been morally preparing to do what's required to achieve equality under those circumstances?
Just quick question to the people here, right? The fact that we're here is not equal. Right? This is like selected by the organization. Then we're here. So I'm just curious. The fact that we're here, the equality is the right topic, like a right approach. Because if it's really equal, then we wouldn't be here. Like there was some kind of the value system at play, and then that's brought us here. And so I'm curious if the equality is the right topic to discuss among these members of individuals.
Well, I think what we're trying to point is like, what are a lot of our blind spots as a collective that holds us, that gets us stuck? Because we're obviously stuck. Like, you look at the world, we can't sort out climate change. Like, there is a rise of anger, political anger that is happening, and what are those blind spots? And like we're trying to say, it's like, oh, the equality complex is a massive blind spot that we hold. And where is it then in our life we see equality, the equality complex play outside in the world, but also in our life? And like equality is a concept. It doesn't exist out there in the world. You can't give me equality.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to kind of wrap it up as well. It's like, I mean, to really get to the point, which I think we get that like love and compassion, right, are like what people actually get to the, like, if you actually look at wisdom traditions, right, who have guided most societies throughout history, right, the core of morality usually is cultivating love and compassion. It's like virtually absent from the conversation of the West. And my response to that would be, look at James Baldwin. James Baldwin, you know, when he started the thing, why didn't he talk to white people about racism anymore, really? Because he said back in the 50s and 60s, I don't want to be to tell you why you are racist. You tell me, right? And so if, you know, who's perpetuating inequality in the world? Well, like the people, you know, who are probably part of that intellectual culture. And it's a bit like, I would kind of say that, like, what Baldwin said was to look really hard inside. You know, that white people should look really hard inside and tell him, why are they so racist? Why can't they get rid of their racism? And so, I mean, the conversation in that, you know, in that discussion kind of falls back on the people who are perpetrating it, right? And if we are unequal and somehow part of a system which generates inequalities, but we are the powerful people, you can say, like, well, you know, we feel bad about privilege, but okay, with great privileges comes great responsibilities. If you aren't looking inside and saying, like, why are we stuck? Right? They can't tell us why we are stuck. The people aren't here. I mean, they probably never met anybody like us. No one is going to come from sub-Saharan Africa and tell you why you are stuck.
Just my personal point of view, Liam.
How about, very intentionally, I have not heard Sanna Rodelius, Sanna Recolas, Saga Rantanen, and Bering.
Right, okay, Alistair, if you want to moderate. Yeah. Okay.
Sanna, I saw you recommending a book, Reauthoring the World. Would you like to give us a little information about what this book is about?
Yeah, it's, I don't know if my internet will break up. It's just that we're blind to the dominant narratives, really. We have dominant narratives in the world, such as hyper-individualism, commercialism, patriarchy, whatever. And then we're allergic to those words. So if I say these narratives in the West, and other cultures have other narratives, and it's just like, you just firm and accept them, and that's the only way to be able to lean into new narratives, and really to see, like, okay, inequality is a symptom of something else. What is it the symptom of? It's not the disease. So, and racism, that's also a symptom of something. And the only way to also move on and find a way to be in this world in a racist society, racist structures. So yes, probably I have a lot of racism within me. I don't want to. I'm not responsible for it. but I can take responsibility I can take responsibility for it. It starts with me, and I see like all of us, the systems we live in as humans, it's living systems. So the change starts with me, and yeah, on the regard of the individual and the collective, individual and the system. Yeah, so that's what I'm sitting with right now. A little bit like, and that's what I recommended that book by Jenny Swart, because it, in a very simple way, puts words to these narratives and how to change them. So if you're a facilitator, it's a very interesting approach.
Just to check, Liam, I mean, we want to let more people share. Also, just to create this was intentionally a two-part session because it takes time to go into these things. I know that Bjorn may not feel that we have answered his question fully, but I can assure you, I assure you we're going to attempt to. But just to flag the session 2 tomorrow, we can continue now, but just to be clear that like we're kind of part of the way through, we'll be continuing both the equality complex, but then coming back into how, I think like Sana was just alluding to it, which is kind of distinguishing certain things starts to give you a power, and like when you see something, you have now some power to act about it or not. You can take responsibility for it. You're no longer just at the effect of it. And I think also Liam was alluding earlier to like what's really behind equality, compassion and love. So just to say, there's going to be part 2 tomorrow that will continue this. So it's not like this is it, because this is almost like we're in the middle and we've not yet reached completion. But I also want to allow us time now. I know we are at time if people do need to drop.
Yeah, I think the discussion is fine. And just to echo Sana's point, I think Sana was really getting at it. That, yeah, it's like separation is at the root of all of these things, right? And we're really getting back to this realization that non-separation, there's something, basic human goodness, which is at the root of inequality and racism. And that's the, Thich Nhat Hanh's point of the quote, is that, equality, you, I, and we have to be equal. Well, these are two separate entities, and that's a certain kind of thinking, which is not, it's discriminatory, right? In the Buddhist sense, right? Discriminating you from I and comparing them, right? It's in a mindset of comparison. And yeah, I think that's what I'd like to say for it from now on. And otherwise, it's people have time for the discussion.
So we go for it.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to here at Life Itself point to is like, if we are here at Untitled to imagine a radically different future, it is important to really question what are the ground on which we stand. Like, you can't build a future before you kind of made some space for it. And so it is very important that we interrogate what are maybe things that the pillar in which we've built a society that led us to where we are now, both the wonders of it and the dysfunctionality of it. It's like, if we don't do that first, it's like putting concrete on top of shit. And the exercise we're doing here is like, okay, let's take out the concrete and look at the shit a bit, clean that up, so we can actually truly create a beautiful, radically better future. And it is something that takes time and is looking at our shadows a bit. And it's an important exercise to do.
I thought, does somebody else have a hand up? Bjorn, I had a hand up.
Yeah, I would like to share just some ongoing thoughts. So I joined this session because I'm really, it's an ongoing question in my personal and even also professional endeavors to understand, and I see it kind of perpetuated here, this idea, some people say, okay, it starts with me. So the basic question, where does change come from and where does it start from? And what I hear is, and that's why I'm curious, you know, talking of life itself, that I don't know if you mean it in this way. My understanding is a big part of our problem that we are facing is what I would call the relation of ourselves with ourselves and the world, our way of being in the world, and how we experience ourselves as a subject in this world, and to fall back then into and I feel that that's the interesting part, to understand that. Well, if you start then from an also ontological perspective, that things are kind of relational, then things don't only start with yourself, and then it opens up to a very different layer. Like we teach, for example, entrepreneurship and the power of entrepreneurship by the example of Gillette, the inventor of the one throwaway razor, to say like, you know, the power of entrepreneurship is really ontological. Gillette never intended this, but bringing in an artifact which so substantially changed the way man related to things. Before, you know, you had a blade you had to take care of, and it was kind of a ritual. You were given to it from your father, and all of a sudden you have a thing, you know, you throw away. Of course, it's not the only thing that changed man's way of dealing with things and of being man kind of the heroes of the universe. But it shows that, you know, where does consciousness and our relation to world and things and ourselves, where does it change? Yes, it can be a very conscious process, but it can also come from experiences through artifacts and other things. So to open up to this perspective, I'm intrigued. And I would actually really, now I would like to continue in part 2.
But also very intentionally, for the people that can't join the second half of the workshop, is like life itself. What is it, right? And what should be, without speaking to the people that are attending the workshop, like maybe the nugget, the piece of gold of the workshop, you know, for contributing for a really radically new narrative for society. You just present yourself and pitch tomorrow's workshop. I think then everybody is happy, because then I get a better understanding how to frame these last 1.5 hours.
Okay, so just I will do it, and we possibly say we admitted at the beginning a little bit. So life itself is, as it says in life, it's an organization. Liam, Sylvie, and myself here are the 3 co-founders. There's a variety of other people involved, some of whom are all coordinated, called Hannah, and so on. We call ourselves pragmatic utopians. So what we're committed to is practical activity for a radically wiser and weller world. And we do just like, what do we do is a variety of things. So one specific thing is we organize spaces where people live. One of here is actually here in Bergerac near Plum Village in France, but hubs where, because if you want a different way of being, or kind of like Bjorn pointed to, basically how we see and come in the world, like how we see things in the world, how the world occurs for us is kind of given by our culture, like other people, like kind of we believe together, if you like. You don't just kind of come up with things on your own. What I mean that literally like what you think is important, etc. So we're building hubs. There's one in Berlin, in fact, in Gneisenhausstrasse, and there's one here in Bergerac in southwest France, and there's one sort of in London at the moment. Slightly COVID is affected, but we're developing these hubs. So that's one practical thing with a kind of culture, and that's the cultures in evolution. And the other thing, that kind of core that we're up to, and there are also some businesses, we're trying to start business that relate to that, but it's kind of more for material sustainability. The other major activity is what we call the big vision conversation. So our theory of kind of societal change would be, one is to say we wouldn't know what the answer was to that. I particularly have done political activism for about 20 years in other areas, 15 years in other areas. All the way up to like European Parliament, but also grassroots organizing. But I don't know how we'll get transformation, but I'm pretty convinced that it has to start. Like most of our society, you alluded to, I'm just going to make a comment. So most of our society today is quite obsessed with what I would call, unfortunately, the surface solutions, and understandably, because there's a feeling of urgency, what I would call techno-solutionism. we're going to invent the blockchain. Like I worked in tech for a long time. We're going to have the blockchain, and that's going to fix voting or the power of central banks or something, or we're going to have a voting app. I worked in civic technology a lot. You know, we're going to fix the fact democracy's not working well by giving people more information or something else. And, you know, the joke I used to have is I worked a lot in open knowledge, open data, but it's like open knowledge doesn't make open minds. You can have all, you know, like that's hard, open minds. Like, you know, for everyone, including me, I'm not, you know. And so the other kind of solution is what I call structural solutionism, which is, let's say, classically would be Marxist, like Marxist type thought. If only we change the ownership of the means of production, then the fund will come forth. And that's the majority of discussions. Even take something like XR, if people know Extinction Rebellion. Is it frozen a bit, or people that can see me? Okay, so would be like, we need a people's assembly, you know, tell the truth, etc. And I think those things are very valuable. I'm not, but I'm saying, I think our thesis is that this kind of, it's the culture stupid, to paraphrase, it's the economy stupid, but it's basically in our being, and I mean our individual and collective being, and they interdepend, of course. And so in a sense, I would describe us as, on that sense, what we call the big vision conversation and cultural activism. So one is we have to learn to kind of dream it again, and we need to make politics cool again. I think very practically, we need a way to be like, yeah, we need hope. It is possible to affect structural and cultural change. And that also begins with ideas. And so, you know, we don't know, but we do quite a bit with XR, like actually in various ways with Liam and other people, but we also do this, and this is the beginning of a journey. We, like, what would, like, just as a kind of assumption, like, I guess to put it, which we may get to or not in this talk, if you just go and look in the manifestos of political parties, or you look in their political programs, how do they see human beings? A lot of the time, if you see human beings a particular way, or you see the world a particular way, you're going to have certain kind of answers. So I'll just take an example, just to make it even very concrete. If you go to the UK education policy, one of their primary goals is safety for children. That's number one. It's like one of the three major goals is children being safe. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's like a way the world occurs is that children need sort of, they're in danger, you know, something might happen to them at school, or they might fall over and hurt themselves, or whatever, psychological and physical safety. Or, you know, we're talking about the equality complex. Those things kind of shape totally the kind of political programs we get at the moment, even on like the big level, but also at the lower level. So you should say a bit.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to point is that talking is easy, knowing is something, but being is where the revolution will start. Can you be compassionate? And this is just a hard thing. There's no shortcut in being. And to really, it will take a different way of being for a different future to arise. And for that different way of being to happen, can't do it alone. You need others. We need to come together to imagine differently, to be together differently. And that's why we want to live, we create hubs so that we can live together, so we can start being together differently and create differently. Because it's not what you create comes from you. It's like children. It's like if you're very angry and you have a child, your child will probably have anger issues, you know? And so we need to be differently. Sometimes it's not so much trying to figure it out, but it comes from, wow, who am I being as a human being?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe just also to end, what's really hard is this dance. So like Alistair pointed to it earlier, like you can either fall into what I call the person's political trap, which is, there's truth to it, but it's not everything. It's like, I'm just going to cultivate my dharma, I'm going to become transformed, and then just around me, there'll be this gradual, but no, there's also politics. There's like collective action. You know, it's like, we actually do need carbon pricing or carbon, but, you know, there's really like specific, you know, structural things, or how does education work for your kids in school? And at the other end, if you just go to like, oh, we just need to go on the barricades and we don't deal with our being, what you're going to get is just kind of all our shadows on loudspeaker a lot of the time, right? Like it's just, and it's that dance that's kind of, I think is hard. I mean, I think is hard. And I'm not saying we but I would say that's the journey and exploration we're on, you know, and just even just to finish, I think even basic things, which is if you want to kind of operate differently, you know, I was talking with actually a guy called, like, it doesn't matter, it's a guy, he was a Zen teacher the other day, and he was like, what's his most basic advice to communities who are trying to do work? It's like, get a job. It's quite funny. He's like, you know, if you can't feed yourselves, like I'm just sort of why this is complicated. If you can't feed yourself, how are you going to follow the dance? Like, you know, you're not going to, you know, like, it's like, and that dance of how do we create a new kind of imaginary world and do the personal, like it's kind of, they intertwine, they interdepend. The personal being and the collective being, the politics and the you know, the transformation.
And I'm just putting in the chat for everyone, if some of you won't be able to join again or would like to get in touch to have further conversation or
yeah, and there was a second point from us just before we end. So that was what we're up to, and in collaboration, like with as who we can find, you know, it's not we're very humble in that regard, actually. The second thing just to check, so there's a pause there, any questions, but also was to answer the second one, what was the goal in tomorrow's session? that was the other question. People get to choose whether they want to actually come or not.
Just thank you for like pitching life itself, because I think, at least, I mean, I'm this ecosystem builder, come from B2B sales, so for me it's always important to get the building blocks right. So it's more the cultural piece, and I get a lot of like integral / proto-integral understanding, which is my background of this. It's intertwined, it's not either or, it's like wisdom but also large scale change. So
is there any other questions there before I just try and answer briefly the nugget about tomorrow, or what to answer that? So great, okay, so so the basic answer is also about time. And so when you say about the session, so there's not like like some brilliant intellectual nugget that will be there that will be like, now it's all solved. It's more that in our experience, so it's the continuation of this conversation. So one thing is that we just to make it real, the being of people coming together like in groups like this and starting to kind of actually do stuff together. Like my joke is 10 well-aligned, committed people could change the world. Like I've formed a lot of groups. I've been in a lot of groups over the last 15, 20 years. And it's to start, you know, like, so that alignment takes time. People coming, asking their stuff, getting clear for themselves, not like on what we're saying, but for themselves on how, oh yeah, I'm just thinking that through, or wow, that does get in my way, or why do I have resignation about that? You know, and I'll just illustrate, you know, a few months ago, we ran a thing at the beginning of COVID called Possibility Now. And people that people we knew well, but we put up stuff about climate. We talked about resignation and being okay with death, for example. Like, because we're so clenched about death, we can't deal with like death of our society, death of ourselves, right? Like, you know, take Harry Potter. Voldemort can't be with death. You know, but if you can't be, for example, very well with death. If you can't
be with death, you can't live.
And you can't really create, for example. But saying that, it's like saying, hey, we all know, when I was 15, I was like, yeah, I know I'm going to die. No, that's really different from actually being president. I'm saying that is that, to finish, going back a few months ago, we did this call at the end of it, we brought up stuff about climate change, and people were just immediately resigned. Like literally people speaking was just like, there's no hope we're going to do stuff. The only hope now is adaptation. Now that's partly true, like we've gone a long way down the track. But what I'm trying to get at is it takes time as a group to get to a place of possibility. It takes time for people to deal with all of their existing assumptions. I'm not saying it's just going to happen tomorrow, but you know, this is a beginning of a journey of a conversation rather than the end, like these two sessions. It takes time to clean out our, let's just put it bluntly, the shit under the concrete, just even for us personally, about politics, about the future, about what's going to happen, about collaboration with people. Yeah, everything just gets in the way, and this conversation is that gold. If you have that conversation with people, it's a conversation that people are having with each other in this school. That's what becomes possible. It's somewhere there's actually a blank canvas from which we start creating of that. And it's not, you know, some of the time that's fast or slow, but that's the goal there, that you start finding, is that then you can move.
Who are your three musketeers?
Yeah, or other collaborators. Then you're in a place, wow, that's a solid foundation on which we can start creating something. And everyone's in a hurry nowadays. You know, I'm not saying, I say about myself, I've got that, I'm going somewhere far too fast sometimes. But I'm just saying is it takes, in my experience now and having done, just takes, you know, this is a taster. But then what we would do is, if people were interested after tomorrow, we would set up ongoing sessions where we come together. So even if you miss tomorrow and you're interested in that, having come to the session, let us know, because we'll say to you, we'll come to people at the end of tomorrow, but even now, and say, hey, we're going to set up a series of conversations ongoingly. Would you like to participate in those? Or, you know, suggest, you know, whatever. That's what will come out of it.
That's it. I think we're way past
time.
I want to say a massive thank you for everyone who came, participated, brought their ideas, and questions are very valuable.
Your listening is all. Yeah.
The speaking only happens in the listening. So there's a wonderful listening here that is very generous. Maybe last one thing that people might want to acknowledge or share.
Oh, one last thing. If you do want the recording, I'm not going to obviously share it publicly, as I assured people, but some people might want the recording for themselves to listen to, or the chat. I noticed Alice has pasted the chat, but we can share that. So again, you can also find us at hello at Life Itself Reaches Us. You know, you are writing just to...
Yeah, I'm just a second. I know that.
Okay.
You don't need to.
I'm being bossy.
But yeah,
I
put my email address on the chat channel, but I will also put the general email. And you can also see... No typo. Yes.
I think Hannah's already posted for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's amazing.
If people want to go off mute and just say, ciao, arrivederci. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Hope to see you around.
Thank you.
Still here.